recorded at Get a Grip Studios in Toronto, Canada, a Get a Grip management production and in association with the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Financially supported by the good folks at the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, this is Restoring Darkness podcast.
This episode of Restoring Darkness is brought to you by Evluma. If you're serious about contributing to the reduction of light pollution, go to evluma.com, hover over products, and click on Dark Sky Friendly Lighting. Both the OmniMax and AreaMax lights are International Dark Sky Association certified. The warmer color temperatures of the OmniMax reduce the more easily scattered blue wavelengths, which contribute to glare and sky glow. With AreaMax lights, you get full cutoff, which also means no uplight and a significantly reduced contribution to sky glow. And all of Evluma's outdoor lighting product lines come with dimmable drivers for even more control. If your customer is looking for dark sky-friendly fixtures with energy savings while still meeting the demands of decorative lighting, look no further than Evluma. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of dark skies.
Welcome to the Restoring Darkness podcast. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Zoe Randle. Dr. Randle is a senior surveys officer for the UK-based charity Butterfly Conservation, one of the largest insect conservation organizations in the world. Dr. Randle coordinates the National Moth Recording Scheme and the butterflies for the New Millennium Recording Scheme for Butterfly Conservation. These data sets hold in excess of 55 million moth and butterfly sightings submitted by over 15,000 volunteer moth and butterfly recorders, or what we call citizen scientists. These data inform all of butterfly conservation's work, from species distribution trends, targeted conservation action on the ground, public engagement, and policy. In 2019, Butterfly Conservation published the Atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths, the first ever atlas landmark publication. First ever atlas covering all larger moths in Britain and Ireland, the Isle of Man, and the Channel Islands. This landmark publication charts the fortunes of the moths. The data are also used by academics and researchers to better understand the patterns of change in moth and butterflies. The impact of artificial light at night as a driver for moth declines is a growing area of research. Dr. Randle is also the ecological lead for Butterfly Conservation's Big Butterfly Count, an annual UK citizen science survey which helps to assess the health of our environment and connect people to nature. Prior to working for Butterfly Conservation, she was a field ecologist, working in a range of different habitats, counting and measuring a variety of different plants and animals for scientific research. In her spare time, she rides her horse, does photography, and star and moon gazing like myself. And writing, she writes to try to make the world make sense. You know, that's a good idea. Her social media handles and all that stuff will be on the Restoring Darkness website. Dr. Randle, I'm so glad you've joined us today.
Oh, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be invited.
You know, I have to say this right off the top. I find that we only want to save the cute animals. You know, the little baby turtles, the butterflies, and, you know, crickets and beetles and moths tend to be ignored. But it seems that, you know, your research is pointing to these moths. And while, you know, I don't really like moths, I kind of find them gross. You know, I think that these things like bats and moths, they're kind of signals. They tell us more. Why moths, and why should we care? Why are moths so important to our ecosystem?
Moths, you know, like you say, moths have, you know, they are sort of seen as the poor relations to the butterflies. But actually, when you look at butterflies and moths as a whole group, you've got the micro moths, which are the smaller moths. You've got the butterflies, and then you've got the macro moths, which are the larger moths. So in effect, butterflies are really just moths. In the UK, we've got 56 resident species of butterfly, and you compare that to 2,500 species of moths.
Mm.
And I think the reason why people don't like moths is because they are, on the whole, nocturnal. There's a whole array of them that are day flying as well, and some of them are really, really pretty. And people get in touch with us and say, "Oh, I've seen this butterfly. What is it? You know, I can't find it in my books or online." And it's like, well, that's because it's a scarlet tiger moth. And it's actually dispels all the myths. It flies by day and it's absolutely beautiful. So I think Yeah, people don't see moths because they're flying at night. And as human beings, I think we've got an inherent sort of fear of the dark as
Mm.
well. But they're really important species because they are really important food for bats and birds. In the UK, sorry, I've got this frog in my throat. These animals. So got, so you've got 2,500 species, and in the UK, people have been studying moths for over 300 years. They
Mm.
used to collect them and pin them, but now people just run a moth trap and count them and write them down in their books and send the data in. Um, but they blue tit chicks eat an estimated 35 billion moth caterpillars a year in the UK,
Hmm.
in Britain alone, and that's based on each pair of blue tits only having one clutch of eggs. So massively important in the food chains for bats as well. Many bats eat moths. Um, and and hedgehogs. Everyone loves a hedgehog. Hedgehogs are another creature in the UK that are declining, and hedgehog caterpillars have been found to be a really important food source for hedgehogs too. They're also likened to the canary in the coal mine because they've got short life cycles, and so they're indicator species. They give us a handle on
Mm.
what's happening to other creatures and what's happening in the environment. And again, ecosystem services, it's all the rage these days in the UK. And across the globe, ecosystem services, there's a growing body of evidence showing that moths are the bees of the nighttime. They're really, really important
Mm.
in pollinating plants and crops. So, and it's the little things that rule the world. And without them, where would we be?
I don't know where we would be, and I think that's an unknown. I've made a list of questions here, but before I ask, is the distinction between a butterfly and a moth purely aesthetic? Like, or is there actually a zoological difference between moths and butterflies?
It's pretty much an artificial divide. I mean, there's a couple of things. People say that butterflies have got clubbed antennae. Well, that's not entirely true because some of the moths have got, antennae that are a bit clubbed. They say that moths fly at night, butterflies fly at day. Well, there's more day flying moths in the UK than there are butterflies. There is one little thing that makes the difference, and that is that moths have a little hook on their wings which join the forewing and the hind wing, and it's called a frenulum. Be very careful when you Google that phrase and put the word moth in front, because otherwise you get all sorts of things pop up. So that's mainly the only detail, is this the frenulum on the wings.
Mm.
But pretty much they're pretty much the same thing.
You mentioned that humans have a fear of the dark. I'm not sure that we naturally fear the dark. I think it's more of a reverence thing in that we're a diurnal species. And I'm not so sure that we fear the dark. I think we've been taught to fear the dark.
Mm.
And I think socially, we think there's more crime at night or different kinds of crime that we should be um, that we need to be concerned about. But how do we dispel this fear? Because the reason we have so much light pollution is because of this safety presupposition that more light pollution equals more safety, which I'm not sure is true.
No, I mean, because they've done studies, haven't they, and shown that with all this light pollution, there are more shadowy areas, and shady characters could hide in the shadowy areas. Um, yeah, I think, like you say, I think we have been conditioned to fear the dark,
Mm.
and but you know, I mean, we're part of nature, aren't we? And I find, I mean, I'm really lucky. I live out in the sticks. I'm about
Mm.
so I don't out in the sticks. It's not in the sticks compared to parts of Canada, but I'm 2 miles outside of town. There's not a great deal of light pollution where I am. The stars look absolutely fantastic, and for me, there's something really amazing about going outside, just standing in the garden barefoot and staring up at the universe. It's just
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And I think that if more of us went out and did that, we would probably feel a bit more connected to everything and maybe feel less fearful of the dark and of the night.
I actually agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that, and while I have great respect for astronomers and what they do, I don't have a natural interest in astronomy. I've been to, look through telescopes. There's the moons of Jupiter. Oh, those two white dots there? Yeah, that's the moons of Jupiter. Okay. Great, I'll see you in 15 years. Like, it doesn't get me excited. And I don't say that pithily. I understand that people are very interested in that. But I think, most people, if this movement takes off, it's going to be from what you just said, which is, connecting themselves to the universe, having a dose of awe and feeling that, hey, what is this all about? Why am I here? These kinds of conversations. There's a reason why, we sacrificed lambs and sent burnt smoke up to heaven, because at night we saw this beautiful stars, right? So, yeah, I agree. We have to dispel the fear and replace it with reverence or something.
Mm.
They're very similar, reverence and fear. It's just the difference in how we react to them. Um, Indicator species. Why is the moth, like, what does it indicate? It's an indicator. It's a canary in the coal mine, as you said. What are they indicating in their decline?
Well, they are, because in the UK particularly, they're so well studied. They can be used as like a surrogate species for less attractive and less well studied species and groups. So, like, spiders, for example, beetles. So, and what moths are telling us, moths are on the decline in the UK. I mean, the Atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths, which we published in 2019, showed that moths have declined by 32% in their distribution. So that's where they're found in the UK since when was it? Since the 1970s. So they're on the decline in terms of where they're found, which indicates that lots of other less well studied groups will also be in decline in terms of distribution where they're found, and also in terms of numbers. I mean, again, we're really lucky over here that we've got these fantastic data sets. We've got the Rothamsted Insect Survey network of light traps across the UK, and those traps they monitor moth abundance every night, and have done since the late 1960s. And they show that the actual abundance of moths, 41% of moth species are declining in abundance. And also total moth abundance, so the total number of moths that are out there, has declined by a third, again, since the late
Mm.
1970s. So
Hmm.
it's quite worrying. It's very worrying. And to think that these things could be happening to other creatures, and also the knock-on effects of those things. So in the UK, again, birds are declining. Most creatures are declining, to be honest, in the UK. That we've got the most well studied for flora and fauna. It's the most
Sure.
we're probably one of the most
And
depleted
and
countries
the
on the planet.
longest
Uh,
history, of
yeah,
studying them, probably in the modern age. How does light
absolutely.
pollution, how does light pollution harm moths? And is it the number one harm they're facing?
Well, like a lot of things that are declining, the main drivers of declines, population declines, distribution declines, is habitat loss. So that can be direct destruction of the habitat by digging up. We've lost something like 98% of our wildflower meadows in the UK since the Second World War and the Dig for Victory campaign. So there's direct destruction of habitats through agricultural intensification, development. There's also things like abandonment of land. So land once upon a time would have been managed would have been grazed by cattle or sheep, but due to market pressures, it's no longer financially viable for farmers to graze the land. So the land is abandoned, so the grass grows, the habitat's no longer suitable for the creatures that live in it. So there's that. And then the other real biggie, and there's also agricultural intensification, pesticide use, herbicide use, unfavourable land management. So we've got a real trend over here for keeping our hedgerows nice and neat and tidy,
Mm.
and everything neat and tidy really, and none of that's very beneficial for our wildlife. And then perhaps the other big driver, for most biodiversity change is climate change. And we can see with moths and also with butterflies, that climate change is affecting where species are found. So if you're a moth that likes to live in cool is cool adapted, so you live in northern England, say, or Scotland, and you found in cooler climates or at higher altitudes, as our climate changes and warms, those species are moving further north, and they're also moving higher uphill, further uphill to higher elevations. But what happens when you get to the north? They get to the north coast of Scotland, or they get up to the top of the mountain. Well, there's nowhere else to go. So climate change is driving that as well. Although some species are doing really well as a result of climate change, and they are spreading northwards because the
Mm.
climate is more suitable. But coupled with that, you've got things like again this available habitat that's available. So a moth or a butterfly or any other creature, yes, it can move further northwards and exploit this warmer temperature, but if the habitat that creature needs and relies on isn't available in that sort of expansion zone, then they can't go anywhere. So their sort of distribution isn't increasing because of this problem with not having anywhere to go. Does that
It
make
does,
sense?
but does the light pollution fall into the habitat loss category?
So I would say that the habitat, the yeah, well, it's kind of another. There's a whole sort of a potent toxic cocktail really of drivers. And it's like if you went to the pub on a Friday night and stuck to one drink, you probably feel a bit rough the next day, but not
Sure.
too bad. But if you're having a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of something else, then
In trouble.
you know you're in trouble. And I think that's what's happening with the moths. And light pollution is a knock-on effect of urbanization as well. So we're developing more and more. There's more and more urban centres, urban sprawl, much more countryside being developed, and as a knock-on effect, you've got all that artificial light at night, associated with that. And you know, so although the impact of light pollution isn't massive on, and there are these other big drivers, it is another, it's another sort of additional factor really, and it can affect that. Well, they've done lots of research and they found that artificial light at night affects pheromone production in female cabbage moths. So that will have knock-on effects with regard to how attractive she is to the males. If she's not producing enough pheromones, or the pheromone blend isn't quite right, then the males aren't going to find her. So there's
Hmm.
reduced reproduction. Sperm production in some male moths has been found to be affected through by light pollution as well. So
Hmm.
again, you've got sterile males effectively, and also the mating behaviour is disturbed under artificial light as well. Some moths, they don't want the lights on, when they're
Hmm.
getting it on,
I
so
don't
there's
blame them.
all sorts of
Can't blame them for that.
so there's all sorts of things really, and yeah, and caterpillar development, it can be in caterpillar development can be affected as well by artificial light at night. And this young brilliant bright spark guy, a chap called Douglas Boys, sadly he's no longer with us, but he was doing his PhD and he's done did some fantastic work looking at the number of caterpillars in areas where you've got street lights compared to equivalent areas where there are not any street lights.
Hmm.
And I've got the figures here. And what he found is that the number of caterpillars under street lights in dark areas, in grass verges, well, in lit areas, the number of caterpillars was reduced by a third
Hmm.
compared to areas without street lights.
Hmm.
And that was looking at the sodium lights as well, which
Hmm.
obviously
Sure.
emit a different wavelength of light.
Sure.
It's been a massive move over here to shift towards LED lighting because
Yep.
it's more environmentally, it's less energy demanding. But what
But
Douglas
but
found,
but
yeah, what
yeah.
Douglas found under these LED lights is that actually there were 43% fewer caterpillars under LED lights compared to the dark areas.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
LED So I'm in the lighting industry. I didn't tell you that, but
Yeah.
I'm outside my office here is a lighting distribution company, and I work in the business every single day. And my my association has been pushing for darkness restoration and night preservation for about 3 years now. And what we've noticed is that uh, everything was sacrificed to the altar of lumens per watt. And no one can it's not possible to dispute the societal benefits of energy efficiency, and nobody's doing that. We're not saying that energy efficiency is bad and we should have high pressure sodium lights, but we need to be very careful when we lock onto one particular metric
Mm.
and just drive towards that. And I find that that's the problem in the climate change science. They don't know what to do about the problem, and they get locked into these certain areas, and they forget that darkness restoration and night preservation is actually the best place for climate change money to work right now. If you want to make a contribution, restoring night and preserving darkness is amazing for the environment, and it is also a driver of energy efficiency, and we have all the technology we need. Everything is developed now, the controls to dim, to turn off, to sensors, to shielded lights, low Kelvin temperature. We have everything we need to do this. And I really encourage any environmentalists listening to this to adopt light pollution as part of as a major environmental problem that we can solve right now, which will contribute to all of these other problems.
Mm.
Um, Tell me a little bit about, you said that the moths are like a signal species. I think light pollution is also a signal of something as well. It seems to follow us wherever we go, and it's getting worse. Do you guys track light pollution in the UK with respect to these rural areas? Is there any studies on that right now that are showing the increases in light pollution, or anything like that?
I'm not entirely sure specifically with the UK, but I am aware that artificial light at night is increasing by something like 2% per year. So,
Ruskin
but
Hartley
as to
from the
whether,
IDA said 10%. The International Dark
wow,
Sky
wow,
or Dark Skies
wow,
International, their new name, great organization. I heard him interviewed. He said it's going at 10% a year since 2015 or something. Anyway, that's not exact, but it was 10% was the number,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's a big number actually.
It is a big number. And and like you say, when you can effectively solve a lot of the problems with light pollution, literally by pushing a button.
Mm,
I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could solve all of the world's environmental problems at the push of a button,
mm.
and we've got the option there.
What was interesting that I don't know how it came about, but your thoughts on this. Humans could go, during the pandemic that when there was the lockdowns, and it was a terrible time. I don't care what your opinion is on all that sort of stuff. I mean, we don't want to, that's not what this show is about, whether, what lockdowns are good or bad. But there was a time when, kind of we went back to being a diurnal species, actually.
Mhm.
There wasn't so
Yeah.
much action at night. And I'm wondering, people say, well, what do we learn from it? One of the things that I take away in this movement is that maybe we could go back to not being as active at night. Obviously, we need hospitals and emergency stuff, but, I don't know if we need Walmart at 2 in the morning. You know what I'm saying? Um, so is that even a possible solution to contribute to the problem? Is that, hey, we actually only work during the day now in general occupations. We don't go out at night. Is that even possible? I don't know.
Well, I don't know either, but I mean, I don't know. It's I think that life has speeded up, hasn't it, for humans?
Mm-hmm.
There's not you can go out and you can consume something, anything, at virtually any time of day
Mm-hmm.
in the developed world, especially.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if you want it, you can just have it, just just like that, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much. And I think that constant wanting and consumption and that constantly needing to be busy thing, is
Mm.
really detrimental to human society, and also I think to our mental health as well, to be
Mm.
constantly being busy. And yeah, and the modern technology with our phones. I mean, this is great. You and I are having this conversation, thousands of miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
But we stay up till late gazing at our phones. And all of that it's almost like we've constantly got to be on the go.
Hmm.
Um, and if we're not constantly on the go, then we're kind of looked at as like weirdos.
Well, you mentioned some
Yeah.
stats about the moths, right? Hormonal problems, lower sperm counts in the male moths, fertility problems. I wonder to myself, if you hear about these same things with humans. I mean, you hear, I mean, you could, all the time I hear stuff about
Mm,
fertility issues and sperm counts in men going down from the 1970s or whatever. And I'm wondering if the lifestyle, which I believe light pollution is the number one signal of. You talked about the signal species, right? I think light pollution is a signal of overconsumption. It's a signal of what is that phrase? Conspicuous consumption. Where
mm.
Uber Eats and all this kind of thing into your door, and I mean you can strike sparks in London, New York, and Toronto any day of the week at any time. You can there's action going on in those cities, and I
Mm.
like that personally.
Yep.
But so this idea of light as a signal, light pollution as a signal. I want to ask you, I'm changing gears here. Tell me about the atlas. How much work was it to produce an atlas of and is it actually a literal map, a book with maps
It,
of where the
oh,
moths
well,
live?
here we are. Here it is. This is it. And it's quite. You can see it's quite a weighty tome.
It's a
It's about
tome.
500 pages. Yeah. It's got over 800 species in it. 893 species, I think. And it took it took an awful lot of time. So you've got people out in the world, out in the UK. They've been recording and counting moths for a long, long time, over about 300 years altogether, and all of their sightings are collated locally by people that are called county moth recorders. They're local experts who gather and collate the data. They check the data for accuracy, and then they send it to butterfly conservation for the national moth recording scheme. So we decided we wanted to produce this atlas because we had something like 20, well, there's 26 million moth records in this book.
Wow.
And we collaborated with Moths Ireland, who are the moth recording scheme for the island of Ireland. And so we gathered all this data. It took us, we started into, when did we start? I think it took us about 3 or 4 years to pull it all together. It took us 18 months to check the records and check for dodgy dots, because obviously county moth recorders as well, they're still human and they may make mistakes. And we worked out the error rate. It was something like 0.08%
Wow.
error. So very
Wow.
few errors
Yeah.
altogether. But when you're dealing with 25.6 million records, that's still quite a lot of records to check. So yeah,
Sure.
it took an awful lot of time. It's a massive collaboration between, it's basically the result of every single individual moth recorder out there from the dawn of time till now. And and the way I look at it, it's like our lives, all of our lives are in here. And there would have been people recording moths like long, long time ago. And did they realize that that action of writing down those moth species that they saw
Mm.
was going to contribute to something like this? It's like
Mm.
a massive collective. The collective has created something fabulous, which is this. And inside it, you've got all the larger moth species of the UK, Britain and Ireland, sorry. And there's a little photograph of each species. We've got distribution trends, so where these moths are found. Are they increasing their distribution and spreading out? Are they retracting their distribution, so getting more and more localized? We've got abundance trends in there. We've got distribution maps. We've got phenology charts as well. We found that an awful lot of moths, I can't remember the exact figure, there's an awful lot of moth species that are flying earlier now than they did in the 1970s. So that obviously that can have knock-on effects for you know their phenology is changing, but is the phenology of their host plant changing, or is there a mismatch in host plant availability and caterpillar you know caterpillar presence or adult moth presence? Um, yeah, it's just, yeah, it really is. It's it's a little treasure trove, really. And you can go to this book, and I've worked for butterfly conservation for about 16 years, and I think, oh, what's happening with that moth? And now I've got somewhere I can go, and I'm like, right, I can see it's only found in this bit of the country, or it's only found here, and it's going up or it's going down, and and it's flying earlier than it was in the 70s, or so yeah, so
Hmm.
I'm really proud of it, actually. It's really
I can
great.
tell,
So
and
yeah.
what's interesting is that I think all the contributors to your work are volunteers. Is that correct?
Absolutely, they are all
Wow.
volunteers, and that is, yeah, and
Well,
that
I'll have
again
to raise
is
a toast to
is
them at some point. Come on, that's
absolutely.
wonderful.
Well, cheers,
Yeah,
cheers, because
cheers.
without
Yeah.
without them, butterfly conservation, without our fantastic volunteers, butterfly conservation would not be able to achieve what it achieves. We wouldn't
Mm,
have these amazing data sets that inform, policy. We produce state of reports that we present to the government. We've got government. The butterfly trends are used as government indicators as well.
mm,
And all of our outreach work, and not to mention the conservation work on the ground, if you don't know where something occurs, you
mm-hmm.
can't save it. So massive big up to all of our volunteers, and we really couldn't do. And I can't remember that they contribute something like several million pounds worth of you know volunteer time to us every year. With them, counting and measuring butterflies, or going out and doing active conservation work. Burning scrub, cutting down scrub, whatever, planting host plants. So yeah, they are absolutely amazing.
It's interesting that I feel, and I'm sad about this, but it feels like that effective volunteerism is something that is not part of the new generation. It doesn't
Mm.
seem, like in Canada, you go to the Rotary Club or the Lions Club, or you go to these organizations like the Butterfly. It's a lot of baby boomers that even in
Yeah.
our association that financially supports this show, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. There seems to be a reticence of the younger generation to volunteer. Maybe they're too busy. Maybe they're distracted. I don't know what it is, but effective volunteerism seems to be becoming a relic of an older generation. Is that my observation the same for your volunteers with the butterfly conservation? They're older people?
It's exactly the same for our volunteers. I mean, the demographic basically, particularly with our county moth recorders and our county butterfly recorders, is they are older men, sort of 65 plus. Um, yeah, 65 plus, retired, and they're mainly men. In terms of our wider sort of membership and our volunteers, there are a lot of women, a lot more women getting involved and getting on board. But in terms of the younger generation, we do. I can't remember exactly what the figures are, but we have got very, very few volunteers under the age of 30.
Mm,
You know, volunteering with us. So that's something that we are trying very actively um, to change. So we are trying to appeal to the younger generation to get them interested in butterflies and moths and volunteering, and also ethnic minorities as well, and
mm,
other marginalised groups in society. So look, these are the opportunities. Come on, join us. You'll have a great time. You'll meet some fantastic
sure,
people, like-minded people.
sure.
Um, but yeah, I'm not. Why don't they volunteer? I think you're right. I think maybe there is. It's the time and lack of time, and oh well, and plus you've got all your social media things to update, haven't you? So
It's
uh,
I have trouble, with there seems to be, in this is only my opinion, there seems to be in the discourse a few issues which dominate everyone's life, and the specifics once there's great meaning to get down to the level of moth counting. Like and people seem to be stuck at this higher level of climate change protest or different kinds of protests, which are very big issues that are very difficult to solve, and there's no real meaningful contribution other than protest, you know. And I think people need to be encouraged to get down to a much more specific level with something where you can make a contribution actually to the change that you're looking for. And
Yeah.
I think counting moths is one of those examples where you could be absorbed by that and make a nice hobby for your on your weekends and meet new people. And so, yeah, I would encourage people that are of that age to get involved. And it's even the National Association of Innovative Land Distributors. We have trouble with younger generation people. Why should I join an association? What's my payback? It's like, actually, it's the other way around. What's our payback of having you as a member? You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Well, you're not
Yeah.
looking at this
Yeah.
correctly. It's your place to
Yeah.
give back. This is where you come to give back to the industry that has paid you so much money and where you've earned a living for your family, and so you give back to that, or you give 2% of your time to volunteer for light pollution committee, or something like that, and you give back, and it's an opportunity for you to do that. I don't think we communicate that the correct way. Our people don't seem to feel it the way they used to. And so we have to
Mm.
reestablish that. We have to change the image of volunteerism. It's not something for older people. It's for everybody to contribute.
Absolutely, and I'm a firm believer with the state of nature and the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis and all of that. I mean, the whole world is in crisis at the moment, isn't it? Let's face it, and
But if
maybe it
everything's a
always has
crisis,
been.
nothing is a crisis, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, well,
it.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It just seems like
yeah.
everything is, I mean, what happened to I mean, I'm going way off topic here, okay? But what happened to the Chinese balloons? Remember the Chinese balloons that were flying over Canada, the
Yeah,
United States? That was a huge
yeah,
panic. Everyone was
yeah,
focused on that for 3 weeks. What's with these Chinese balloons? Da, da, da. And now it's
yeah,
gone.
yeah,
Like, what happened
yeah.
to the balloons? I thought there was balloons everywhere. I thought they were spying on us. But these distractions,
Mm.
it's, and I believe, Dr. Randall, that light pollution is a symbol of that. It's a symbol of that
Yeah.
distraction or that chaos or the overstimulation or something. Whether the light pollution is coming from your device or whether it's coming from the street light or the sign or whatever, we're too distracted. We can't see right. And so,
Yeah, I think you're right, and it is. It's about that's the one thing that I kind of learned or discovered in the lockdowns and everything that we had over here during the COVID thing was that it's actually the simple things in life that really matter.
mm,
And yeah, it's the simple things in life, and having that, like you say, that connection to something, be that staring up at the stars at night, or running a moth trap in your garden, or just listening to the bird song in your garden, or just noticing that, connecting with nature, because we're so, as a species, we are so divorced from nature.
mm-hmm,
And I think what we forget is that we are part of nature, and we effectively, and
mm-hmm.
there'll be a lot of people that won't like this at all, but we are effectively another animal that inhabits the planet. That's all we are, is another animal. And I think we're the only animal on the planet that is hell bent on destroying its resource base.
I think we're
Yeah,
psychologically divorced, but we're not divorced. We're part of nature. There's no escaping
yeah,
it. You know
yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah,
And we're
yeah,
feeling
yeah,
just like the moths. People are
yeah,
feeling the effects of this, and light pollution is, again, like I said, a great symbol of
yeah.
the overconsumption and the constant need to move and this sort of thing. But
Mm,
this is a solvable problem, this light pollution thing. And I'd
yeah.
like to encourage everybody to get involved in this movement. Dr. Randall, do you have any? We're coming up on 40 minutes. Do you have any final thoughts that maybe I missed or I didn't ask you about, or anything for the Restoring Dark listeners before we sign off?
I just think that people, if people are interested in nature or moths or whatever, just get out there and do it.
Mm,
Just connect with nature, marvel at the beauty and the wonder of it all. And
mm,
and in Canada, you guys, there's a guy called Joe Bowden. He's going to name check him. He's an entomologist with the Canadian Forest Service,
mm-hmm,
and he's been setting up what they call these moth walls in the national parks, in the in Atlantic Canada. So you've got in a national park, you'll have a whiteboard with a light on it, and people can go along and take photographs, and then send the
Sure.
photographs off, and AI will identify them for them. So Joe's trying to do this in Canada to get people interested in moths and in nature, and I just think that's what we need to do more of, is get in touch with nature. What's the real things in life, not the fakery,
Well,
the real stuff.
I was talking to my daughter. She likes to play this video game. I can't remember what it's called or whatever. Listen, it's unfortunate, but the smartest people in the world, the most talented people in the world, work in Silicon Valley for companies that create addictions, social media and video game companies. It's actually quite sad. Those are our best resources, our best humans. They make Twitter, they make video games, they make these addictive things that add zero productivity to our lives and our economy. It's sad. But I was talking to my daughter, and I said, can you tell me in the last 3 years your best moment playing video games? And she couldn't remember any particular moment.
No.
And I said, okay, well, tell me about your best moment going to the cottage. She goes, I got hundreds. I said, tell me your best one. Up to the cottage. She said, well, that time, during COVID, when you took me and my friends to the cottage and you made us close our eyes and you took us out on the dock and we laid down, and then you pulled I had a mask over their eyes and the stars were all in front of us. Boom, they laid down on the dock, and I took their masks off. I walked them down and laid them down, lay down. And then I pulled their mask off. And I was like, whoa, holy mackerel. It was a beautiful night full of stars. And she totally remembers that. She'll never forget that moment. And she can't remember anything she did on video games. And so these experiences in nature are so impactful on people, Dr. Randle, and we need to get back to them and have them more often in our lives. Yeah. Well,
absolutely,
folks,
definitely.
Yeah. So we've made it to the end, another 40-minute show here, folks, on the Restoring Darkness, and I appreciate all the people out there that watch and listen to this, subscribe to our stuff. And this show is going to be entering a new format. So this is Dr. Randle. You were the last guest of the old format. We're moving to a new format coming up in a couple weeks. I don't know, Scott, what do you think? A week or two? Something like that. He's waving his hand at me like this for people that are listening. He's going like this. But yeah, we're going to be changing this up and advancing it. So we thank you for joining us and look forward to our new show. Dr. Randle can be found at butterflyconservation.org, bigbutterflycount.org, and on Twitter, she's the moth_lady, moth lady. So check her out. And the rest of her links are on the Restoring Darkness website. For now, I'm going to say bye. Thanks for listening and watching.
Look no further for dark sky-friendly products than Evluma. Since its first product launch, Evluma has carried one or more International Dark Sky Association certified models. If your customer cares about light pollution, suggest the OmniMax with shielding or the Area Max with full cutoff to reduce uplight and glare. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of darkness.